The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Owen Nash stepped into the gas station, the smell of stale coffee and motor oil thick in the air. He pulled his hoodie tighter around his face, glancing around the empty aisles. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and aside from the cashier half-heartedly scrolling through his phone, the place was dead quiet. Owen had inherited the 12-store gas station chain from his father, but over the past year, he had started hearing troubling reports: employees quitting, complaints about overworked staff, even rumors of theft. His district manager, Paul, always brushed it off. Normal turnover, he'd say. Nothing to worry about. But Owen wasn't convinced. If things were fine, why did he keep getting emails from exhausted employees begging for help? So he had come undercover. He grew out a short beard, wore an old beaten-up hoodie, and slapped on a pair of glasses. None of the employees had ever met him personally. His father had been the face of the company, but Owen had stayed behind the scenes. To them, he was just another tired traveler stopping for coffee. As he poured himself a cup, he noticed the night guard slumped behind the counter, head resting against his arms. At first, Owen assumed he was just taking a break, but then he saw the slow rise and fall of his chest. He was asleep. The cashier, a young guy with greasy hair and an irritated expression, nudged him with his foot. "Yo, wake up, man." The guard jolted upright, eyes wide with panic. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes, uniform wrinkled and stained. "Sorry," the guard mumbled, rubbing his face. "Dude, you can't keep doing this," the cashier snapped. "If the manager comes in and sees you like that, you're done." Owen took a sip of his coffee and casually leaned against the counter. "Rough night." The guard let out a bitter laugh. "Rough month." Owen raised an eyebrow. "Yeah." The guard ran a hand through his short, messy hair. "They fired the other night guy 2 weeks ago. Didn't replace him. Been pulling doubles almost every night since. Barely get 4 hours of sleep before I have to be back here." Owen frowned. "That legal?" The guard scoffed. "Probably not, but the manager doesn't care. He says if I don't like it, I can leave. But I got rent, man. Got a kid. Can't afford to just walk away." Owen clenched his jaw. This was exactly the kind of thing he had been worried about. The cashier shook his head. "Better hope the cameras didn't catch you sleeping again. Last time, the manager said one more time, and you're fired." The guard exhaled sharply. "Man, I wasn't even out for 5 minutes." "Doesn't matter," the cashier muttered. "You know how he is." Owen had heard enough. He set his coffee down and turned toward the door. He needed to see for himself just how deep this issue ran. Tomorrow, he was going undercover at the store. Owen arrived at the gas station the next night, dressed in worn-out jeans and a faded work shirt. He had spent the day at corporate, reviewing shift schedules and payroll reports for the store. What he found left him furious: severe understaffing, employees pulling back-to-back shifts, and a manager who regularly ignored overtime laws. Now, he was stepping into that world firsthand. The assistant manager, a wiry man in his 40s named Greg, barely glanced up when Owen walked in for his supposed first shift. "You're the new guy?" he asked flatly, stuffing a clipboard under his arm. His tone made it clear he didn't care about the answer. Owen nodded. "Yeah, just call me Nate." Greg exhaled through his nose, already impatient. "All right, look, we don't have time for training. You stock shelves, clean the floors, and do whatever the cashier tells you. If I catch you standing around, it's a problem." "Got it." Owen nodded again, biting back his irritation. He had expected some level of disinterest, but this was something else. Greg handed him a cheap plastic name tag and walked off without another word. The cashier from the night before his name tag read Kyle glanced over from behind the counter, chewing gum lazily. "New guys don't last long here," he said, more amused than concerned. Owen focused on his task, stacking bottled drinks in the refrigerator. As he worked, he kept an ear open, listening to the way the store ran, or rather, how it struggled to run. A customer came in and waited at the register while Kyle scrolled on his phone for almost a full minute before ringing them up. The night guard, who Owen now knew was named Jason, stood near the door, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He looked even worse than the night before, his uniform more disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. Greg reappeared, barking orders at Jason without bothering to look at him. "Make sure no one's hanging around outside. Last week, some guy tried to sleep by the pumps, and I don't need that headache again." Jason didn't argue. He just nodded sluggishly and stepped outside. Owen clenched his jaw. The way Greg treated him wasn't just indifferent, it was callous, as if Jason wasn't even a person, just another part of the store to maintain. A few hours passed, and the exhaustion in the air grew heavier. Jason came back inside, rubbing his arms against the night chill. He moved toward the back of the store, likely trying to shake off the fatigue creeping in. Owen walked over and lowered his voice. "You all right?" Jason blinked at him, as if surprised anyone had asked. He ran a hand over his face before answering. "Just trying to stay awake." Owen grabbed a couple of energy drinks from the shelf and set them beside him. "These help." Jason huffed a tired laugh. "Not really. Not when you're running on empty." He took one anyway, cracking it open with a sigh. Owen leaned against the shelf. "I saw the schedule. You really working doubles every night?" Jason nodded. "Can't afford not to." Kyle called from the counter, his voice laced with mock sympathy. "Don't get too comfortable, man. Greg catches you standing around, he'll blow a fuse." Jason straightened immediately, tossing the half-finished drink into the trash before heading toward the door again. Owen watched him go, his frustration growing. Greg didn't run this store, he ruled it. Employees weren't quitting because they couldn't handle the job, they were quitting because they were being treated like disposable parts. By the time morning rolled around, Owen had seen enough. Jason had nearly fallen asleep standing up. Kyle had openly ignored customers. Greg spent most of the shift in the back office, only emerging to bark orders or complain about something being done wrong. And yet, somehow, the store continued to operate barely. Owen knew what he had to do next. It was time to confront Greg. Owen stood in the back stockroom, gripping the edge of a metal shelf as he took a slow breath. The night had exposed everything he needed to see. The exhaustion, the neglect, the way Greg ran this store like a machine with no regard for the people inside it. Now it was time to put an end to it. He stepped out onto the floor just as Greg emerged from the office, stretching his arms with a yawn. The man barely worked, yet he carried himself like a king surveying his kingdom. Owen approached him directly. "We need to talk." Greg barely glanced at him. "About what?" "Jason." Greg scoffed and shook his head. "What about him?" Owen's voice remained even. "He's barely staying on his feet. You've been pushing him past his limits, and it's dangerous." Greg let out a short laugh. "That's his problem. If he can't handle the job, he shouldn't be here." Owen felt anger tighten in his chest. "You fired the other night guard and never replaced him. That's not Jason's fault." Greg folded his arms, finally giving Owen his full attention. His expression twisted in irritation. "Look, I don't know how long you've been working, but let me explain something to you. This place runs on people who don't complain. Jason needs the hours, and I need someone on shift. Simple as that." Owen didn't back down. "You don't need him. You need two people doing that job." Greg's lip curled in amusement. "You think you know how to run a store better than me?" Owen held his stare. "I think I know when someone's being pushed to the breaking point." Greg exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You want to babysit him? Go ahead. But if he falls asleep again, he's fired. I don't care how tired he is." Owen clenched his jaw. He wasn't going to argue anymore. Instead, he walked past Greg and straight to the front of the store. Kyle watched him curiously from behind the counter as Owen pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before a voice picked up. "Paul. It's Owen. I need you at the gas station now." There was a pause on the other end, then a confused reply. "Owen? What are you? Just get here. Bring the district reports. He hung up before Paul could ask anything else. Kyle's eyes flickered with interest. What was that about? Owen didn't answer. He had already said enough. Within 30 minutes, Paul arrived, stepping inside with a puzzled expression. He was a stocky man in his 50s, wearing a neatly pressed button-down and a watch that probably cost more than most of the employees made in a month. He spotted Owen and walked over, lowering his voice. What's going on? Why are you here? Owen didn't waste time. I've been working this store undercover. Paul's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. You what? Owen gestured toward the store. I've seen everything firsthand. Greg is running this place into the ground. Employees are quitting because they're being overworked and treated like they don't matter. Paul's mouth opened, but Owen wasn't finished. I want the payroll reports for the last 3 months. I want to see every overtime hour that's been ignored and every shift that's been understaffed. Then I want Greg in the office. Now. Paul hesitated, glancing around as if looking for an escape. Owen, this isn't something we handle like this. We have procedures. Those procedures are failing. Owen's voice was sharp. You told me everything was fine. You told me there was nothing to worry about. But you've been letting this happen under your watch. Paul stiffened. I didn't know it was this bad. Owen's eyes darkened. That's the problem. You should have. Paul swallowed, realizing there was no arguing. He nodded stiffly and turned toward the office. Greg was inside, leaning against the desk with an annoyed expression when Paul stepped in. Owen followed, shutting the door behind them. Greg rolled his eyes. What's all this about? Owen took a step forward. You're done here. Greg blinked. Excuse me? You've been overworking your staff, ignoring safety concerns, and running this store like a dictatorship. Owen's voice was calm, but there was no room for negotiation. You don't get to do that anymore. Greg's face twisted in disbelief. You can't just fire me. Owen tilted his head. I own this company. I can do whatever I want. Greg's entire body went rigid. His mouth opened slightly, as if he had misheard. You what? Owen pulled the fake name tag off his shirt and dropped it onto the desk. Owen Nash, CEO. Greg's face drained of color. Paul shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Owen, maybe we should. No, Owen's voice was firm. This isn't up for discussion. Greg, you're done. Greg's shock faded into anger. You can't run this place without me. Owen's expression remained unreadable. Watch me. Greg stared at him for a long moment, then let out a bitter laugh. Fine. Good luck keeping this place together, without someone who actually knows how it works. Owen didn't say anything. He just stepped aside and gestured toward the door. Greg stormed out, shoving past Paul on his way to the parking lot. Owen turned to Paul. We're fixing this. Now. Paul nodded quickly, already pulling out his phone. Owen stepped out of the office and back onto the floor, his gaze landing on Jason, who was still barely keeping himself upright. That was about to change. Owen walked to the front of the store, his mind already assembling the changes that needed to happen. The first priority was Jason. That man had been pushed to his absolute limit, and Owen wasn't going to let him struggle another night. Jason stood near the entrance, his posture stiff as he watched Greg's car pull out of the parking lot. His exhaustion was obvious, but there was something else now, a quiet uncertainty, as if he wasn't sure what was coming next. Owen approached him, stopping a few feet away. Jason turned, his expression guarded, waiting for whatever came next. Owen told him to take the next 3 days off, with pay. Jason blinked, stunned, as if he hadn't heard correctly. Owen repeated himself, making it clear that this wasn't optional. Jason hesitated, looking around the store, then back at Owen. He asked if this was some kind of setup, if he was being pushed out like the others before him. Owen shook his head. He explained that things were going to be different now. Jason had been carrying a burden that wasn't his to bear, and it was time to fix that. Jason exhaled, the tension in his shoulders loosening slightly, though there was still a trace of doubt in his eyes. Owen understood after everything Jason had endured, a sudden promise of relief would naturally feel suspicious. Owen turned his attention to Kyle, who had been watching the exchange while leaning against the counter. Kyle's expression flickered with something between curiosity and apprehension. Owen asked how long Kyle had been working there. Kyle answered without much enthusiasm, saying it had been a little over a year. Owen then asked if he had ever seen the store fully staffed during that time. Kyle let out a dry laugh and shook his head. Owen pressed further, asking about the other employees who had left. Kyle shrugged, saying most quit after a few months. The pay wasn't worth the stress, and management didn't care enough to replace them. Owen took a moment, processing that. It was worse than he thought. The store had been running on a skeleton crew for far too long, and the employees who stayed were either too stubborn to leave or had no other options. Owen turned back to Jason and told him again to go home. Jason hesitated for a second longer, then nodded slowly. He looked almost dazed, as if the idea of rest was foreign to him. Without another word, he walked toward the back to grab his things. As Jason disappeared into the stockroom, Paul finally stepped forward, his phone still in his hand for making calls. His face was tight, his usual confidence shaken. He told Owen that a replacement manager would take over by the next shift. Owen nodded. That was a start, but it wasn't enough. He told Paul that they weren't just dealing with a bad manager, they had a systemic problem. The company had allowed stores to be neglected, employees to be overworked, and concerns to be ignored. That had to change. Paul shifted uncomfortably, nodding in agreement, though it was clear he hadn't expected this level of scrutiny. Owen didn't let up. He told Paul to start reviewing staffing across all locations immediately. Every store would be checked, and any similar issues would be addressed. Kyle, still listening from the counter, raised an eyebrow and muttered that he'd believe it when he saw it. Owen met Kyle's gaze and said he intended to prove it. At that moment, Jason returned, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He paused near the entrance, glancing between Owen and Paul. He asked if there was really going to be someone else covering the night shift. Owen assured him there would be. Jason nodded, still processing everything, then muttered a quiet thanks before stepping outside. As the door closed behind Jason, Owen turned back to Paul. He said that this wasn't just about fixing a single store, it was about making sure this never happened again. Paul gave a slow nod, finally understanding that this wasn't just another routine adjustment. Owen exhaled, running a hand through his hair. There was still a mountain of work ahead, but for the first time in a long while, the company was headed in the right direction. And this time, he would make sure to keep his eyes open. The store felt different now. The tension that had lingered in the air since Owen first arrived had started to dissipate, though the weight of everything that had happened still pressed against him. Greg was gone. Jason was finally getting the rest he deserved, and a new manager was on the way. But Owen knew this was just the beginning. Paul remained at the front of the store, shifting his stance, as if unsure what to do next. His usual corporate detachment had faded, replaced by something that resembled quiet discomfort. He had spent years trusting reports and numbers, believing that if there was a real issue, someone would bring it to his attention. Now he had seen firsthand how much had slipped through the cracks. Owen told Paul to stay and oversee the transition. The employees needed to see that leadership was paying attention, that they weren't just names on a payroll spreadsheet. Paul gave a slow nod, glancing around as if seeing the store for the first time. Kyle, still behind the counter, tapped his fingers idly against the register. His usual detached demeanor had softened slightly, though skepticism still clung to his expression. He had seen managers come and go, promises made and broken. He wasn't going to believe in change just because someone in a suit said it was coming. Owen asked Kyle about the store's daily operations, what actually happened when corporate wasn't watching. Kyle hesitated, then leaned against the counter, his voice lower than before. He told Owen about the supply shortages that never got addressed, the broken equipment that took months to be fixed, the times employees had to cover for each other because nobody wanted to work here anymore. Owen listened carefully, not interrupting. Every piece of information confirmed what he already suspected. Neglect wasn't just coming from Greg, it was embedded in the way the entire system operated. A delivery truck pulled into the lot outside, the bright headlights cutting through the early morning dimness. The back door of the truck swung open, and a worker hopped out, clipboard in hand. The store's supply shipment had arrived. Kyle pushed off the counter, muttering that it was about time. He moved toward the storage area, leaving Owen standing near the register. Owen watched as the delivery worker unloaded crates, stacking them near the entrance. The process was clunky. Kyle had to step in to direct things, since there was no clear system in place. The lack of organization was another problem that needed fixing. Paul stood nearby, observing everything with a furrowed brow. He finally spoke, saying that if this was happening in one store, it was likely happening in others. Owen agreed. They needed a full audit of operations across every location. Staffing, supply chains, management efficiency, everything had to be reevaluated. The delivery worker finished unloading and handed off a clipboard for a signature. Kyle signed it without looking up, then started moving crates to the back. Owen followed, stepping into the stockroom. The shelves were unevenly stocked, some areas overflowing, others nearly empty. It was clear that inventory had been mismanaged for a long time. Kyle glanced over his shoulder, saying that Greg never really cared about inventory as long as the bare minimum was met. Sometimes supplies ran low, and employees had to make do. Owen ran his hand along a shelf, his mind already cataloging everything that needed to change. It wasn't just about fixing broken systems, it was about rebuilding trust with the people who worked here. Kyle paused for a moment, then asked if Owen had ever worked a job like this before. Owen thought about it. He had spent most of his career in boardrooms, analyzing spreadsheets, making decisions from a distance. But before that, before the company had grown, he had worked alongside his father in the early days, stocking shelves, cleaning floors, learning every part of the business. Somewhere along the way, he had lost that connection. Kyle didn't press for an answer, just nodded slightly, as if he already knew. Owen exhaled, stepping back toward the front of the store. The morning light had started creeping in, the world outside waking up. A car pulled into the lot, and a woman stepped out, adjusting the strap of her purse as she headed inside. She hesitated near the counter, looking around as if expecting someone. Kyle glanced up and greeted her, his tone neutral. She asked if Greg was around. Owen stepped forward before Kyle could answer. He told her that Greg was no longer with the company. The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. She said she was Jason's wife. Owen straightened, listening closely. She said Jason had called her on his way home, told her he was finally getting time off, that things were changing. She had come to see if it was really true. Owen assured her it was. She nodded slowly, then said Jason had been struggling for months, barely sleeping, barely functioning. She had begged him to quit, but they couldn't afford it. Owen felt a twinge of guilt. This wasn't just about employees, it was about families, about the lives affected by every decision made at the top. She thanked him, her voice quiet but sincere, then turned to leave. Owen watched as she walked back to her car, then turned to Paul. This wasn't just a one-time fix. They had to make sure this never happened again, not just here, but across every store. Paul gave a firm nod, finally understanding the weight of the responsibility they carried. Owen looked around the store one last time, then stepped outside. There was work to be done.